Now that we've covered the fundamentals of mobiles, user interaction, and platforms, we're actually going to back up a step and start working through the design process. First, a step you should start doing before you actually identify the platforms to build. Information architecture is a term or concept you may have heard. You may have used it, and you may have misused it, so I have to talk about it a bit, even if you are an experienced designer. IA is the underlying organization, structure, and nomenclature that defines the relationships between a site's content or functionality. Navigation communicates to the user where they are within an interactive website, app, or anything, and allows access to the features and information. But it's an abstraction of the complete structure. IA is not navigation, but the structure you derive navigation from. IA is not just digital or about one channel. You can do a lot of IA work before you have settled on a platform. I often do that and use the structure to help define what features go on which platform, or even to make informed choices about the platform needs at all. Information architecture is really not about the UI, but the users, their expectations, and their experiences. For a long time, we've assumed computers are infallible, but long ago they were not. And lately, we've realized that in aggregate, there are still problems. Resilience engineering is something used to keep big, reliable services like Google, Facebook, Etsy, Flickr, Yahoo, or Amazon online. At a deep engineering level, they follow practices and procedures to ensure their systems are not brittle and avoid failure, or, more often, to fail gracefully and make sure they can be fixed easily, even with unavoidable problems like power failures, network breaks, or typhoons. Resilience is usually defined as the ability of a system to absorb disruptions without tipping over into a new kind of order. A building, exposed to too much lateral ground movement, settles into a state of pile of rubble on the ground, unless you design it to resist this disruption adequately. You can't prevent these problems, you have to expect and plan for them. From our point of view as designers, remember that everything you do is too complex to adequately model and map. Assume you've always missed something, so you're prepared to deal with the unexpected, both in design, and so you can modify your product over time to take advantage of new ways you find people using your information. And therefore I say there's something called resilience design. Here's a simple example. Though I love my smartwatches, I also still wear normal dial watches. One is a dive watch, because it's shiny, not because I'm a diver or anything. It's one of those with a twisty ringer on the outside. That part with the numbers out there twists around. If you don't know, and I didn't until recently, this is used as a simple timer. But on mine, and all dive watches as opposed to aviators watches, the ringer only goes one way. There's a clicky detent that prevents it from going clockwise. It only goes counterclockwise. Why? Because I eventually found out it's for timing remaining air. The ring might very well get bumped and change its setting. Having it show less time might be inconvenient, but going the other way might kill you. And what I love is you don't need to know this. It just works. That's the sort of brilliantly simple answer I'm talking about with resilient design. You need to make your designs resilient because users will never, ever do what you expect. You or others in your organization probably draw diagrams that assume everyone starts at the home page, drills down through a preferred path, and gets their information. But it's not true. People bookmark, share, and search. They use their process in unexpected ways. Your system returns errors or data you didn't expect. If you try to design to accommodate those or to test for them in the traditional use-based model, you can't. For one project I worked on, I did some quick math in a meeting one time, and to create the use cases for all likely variations would take approximately the remaining life of the universe. Really. Believe it when I say these are arbitrarily complex products, so don't lament, but embrace the complexity. This happens even before they get to you. I mentioned search, and on a typical website, I find the home page as the entry point is rarely over 10% of visits, and is often so low as to be ignored. Hundreds of visits a month, when hundreds of thousands visit the site. This chart is real data, and is typical of many clients I work for. This is even more important the way people engage in mobile devices. People seek out and consume content, sometimes a few seconds at a time. They get interrupted and come back to read a bit again, so it has to be ready for them. Does your information work well and make sense if set aside for a few minutes, a few hours? Does it work in the background? Make sure session expiry or other technical things don't get in the way of users coming back. And remind them to come back. Use SMS, app notifications, or reminders within the site or app of items that may be interesting or that they didn't complete. Or send them emails, or postcards, or whatever fits the way you have a conversation with your customers or users. Because content and information is how we live and breathe. Where is the content? Wherever the user is. You don't architect the website or the app, but the service that you provide to your users. Thinking of systems means thinking about how information works agnostic of channels. It means thinking of information architecture, data architecture, even storage technologies, and what's in the API first. Think about some really successful products. Twitter, which is SMS-based, but you use a website or an app on your computer or handset or tablet. Or take Evernote. Which of you used some competing tool to keep track of stuff like that a few years ago? SimpleNote, SpringPad, WizNotes, Google Keep, FetchNotes, OneNote, Notion Note. Oh my god, there are so many of these. Well, most of those disappeared, or are much smaller now. Why? Because they were terrific websites, or apps, or on iOS only. But Evernote was a platform, and is so now more than anything. They built not a website or an app, but a product around people's needs to capture, store, and retrieve. Their platform even has a name. It's called Trunk, if you care. Teams work on that product in and of itself. Thinking of their product as a service meant they could move into new platforms immediately, or share with other people's platforms, as we've seen lately, without rethinking their business model or re-architecting their systems. Being user-centric means they made decisions good for their product and their business, instead of what is comfortable or easy to build. So you need a design like this, and you need to be able to show it off. You need to make information architecture documents to communicate it. There's much discussion of those if you look at general UX practice, but I and many others like to consider the best way to design is truly from the user's point of view. Think about them, their motivations, their goals, and the real broader environment, but what they already do with their day, if it's raining or they're driving versus walking. Design not just the boxes, but the arrows. How does the user flow through the system? Or, discussing the complexity, how could they flow through the system? There are many ways to draw this, but most of all, make sure you talk about services, data, sensors, networks, and users, not screens, pages, and buttons. It doesn't have to be pretty. Just start with boxes, or even literally take post-its off the wall from any feature description you were doing, and start the diagram. From that, gathering requirements from your users or clients. If more comfortable thinking about the user and their environment directly, this is a good place to use the storyboard. And feel free to use several methods at once. Some of these diagrams I've just shown you were from the same project, just different ways of depicting and thinking about the user's interaction with the system. You may be wondering, how do we think about data and systems and connectivity? Well, do that also. None of this is just about users or just about any one facet. Ideally, you never again make a document that disregards other layers in the stack. In this case, your data and interconnectivity is critical. It might be hard to see or to make everyone understand that a box is not about UI but process. You may need to extract it more explicitly like this, with the light blue row at the bottom of external data sources and sensors. Remember, end users don't see these diagrams. Don't let anyone get worried about being confused by how complex and interactive and multimodal they are. The final interface doesn't have to be confusing. Do you know the IA of Amazon or your favorite news source? Probably only a smattering of it. You may know that you should search on Amazon within books to make sure you can find the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book instead of being flooded with results from that pretty mediocre movie. Because IA is not navigation or wayfinding, but it can inform it. Like many news sources do, you can expose the categories not as tedious tab bars, but as ways to organize the information organically. Users can find the story they're looking for, or the category of information. I think we're all familiar with how Netflix works as well like this. And here's a good example of complexity. Funny categories, categories specific to your user's behavior, can be exposed to make apparent how the system works and help the users find content they want. Always be thinking of the end user. Not just what is a good feature, but what is an anti-good feature. Are you making your users do too much work that you can do for them? Are you making them mistrust the system? In a not as unusual case as you might expect, are you actually scaring them with how your system works? Even as pure information architecture, that creepy helpful scale can be tricky to balance out and find the right point that you should live on it. Next, I want to keep talking about these same topics, but how they can be applied when your app or website isn't even running, or where you reach the limits of what it can and should do by itself.